Hello, distinction students. Welcome to our civic education online class. This video will discuss human rights. Okay, so we're going to discuss human rights. Okay, so what we need to first of all understand is what the Bill of Rights is in order for us to really understand what this topic is all about. All right, so to begin with, we should know that the Bill of Rights is a list of fundamental rights and freedoms that are covered in Part 3 of the Constitution of Zambia, right? And we all know that the Constitution of Zambia is the supreme law of the land, which means that all these other laws are below the Constitution. All right. So now, the Bill of Rights again is a country's main instrument of protecting the rights and freedoms of the individuals. All right. That is the reason why we have the Bill of Rights. Because it is the country's instrument of protecting the rights and freedoms of the individuals. So, the Bill of Rights in Zambia is actually entrenched in the Constitution, and therefore, okay, it cannot be easily amended because of the strict amendment requirements. Okay, you just can't have an easy amendment when it comes to the Bill of Rights, okay, because it is entrenched in the Constitution. Okay, now it can only be amended after a national referendum, right, in which not less than 2/3 or 50% of the eligible voters vote in favor of the amendment. All right, so now the constitutional provisions in the Bill of Rights largely reflect on the provisions that are contained in the International Bill of Rights. Okay, and these are the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which the other video, all right, discussed. Then we also have the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. This was also discussed in the other video. We also have the International Convention on Cultural and Political Rights, also discussed, as well as the 2 optional protocols. Okay, so these are the constitutional provisions that are in the Bill of Rights that are bent on reflecting the provisions that are contained in the International Bill of Rights. Okay, so now, as a member of the international community, right, Zambia committed herself, or rather still commits herself, to respecting human rights by acceding to the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, as well as the International Convention on Civil and Political Rights. Okay, so Zambia has also ratified various international conventions, such as the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. All right. Then aside from that, there's also the Convention on the Rights of a Child. We also have the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, as well as the Convention Against Torture and Other Cruel and Degrading Treatment of Punishment. All right. So this is it about the National Bill of Rights itself, the Zambian Bill of Rights, and why is it that it can't be amended easily. We know it's entrenched in the Zambian Constitution, and just for it to be amended, we need a referendum, okay, in which not less than 2/3 or 50% of the eligible voters agree to this amendment. Okay, then the reflections are what was discussed when we were looking at the International Bill of Rights. Okay, so now let's quickly get into the brief history of Zambia's Bill of Rights. All right. So we need to understand before anything else that Zambia has had a Bill of Rights since 1964. All right. And then its history is contained in several other things that I will bring out right now. So to begin with, the Bill of Rights was incorporated for the first time in the Northern Rhodesia Self-Government Constitution of 1963. And then it was reproduced with minor amendments in the 1964 Multi-Party Democratic Constitution. Then again from there, we also get to look at the 1972 Chona Commission, which recommended the introduction of one-party participatory democracy, which was effected the following year in 1973. Then, this amendment in the Independence Constitution limited the enjoyment of the rights and freedoms of individuals. Then afterwards, we have the 1991 Mvunga Commission, which recommended the reintroduction of multi-party democracy in Zambia with an inclusion of the children's rights for the first time. Then we had the 1996 Mwanakatwe Commission, which also made a few amendments to the 1991 Constitution, right? The Bill of Rights was left intact, all right? So this is where our history stands out from as Zambian, our history of the Bill of Rights. So at first, there were Bill of Rights that were incorporated into the Northern Rhodesia Self-Government Constitution. That was the first constitution that we had. Then secondly, we had the Chona Commission, which recommended the introduction of the one-party state. Secondly, we went to the Mvunga, which recommended the reintroduction of the multi-party democracy. Then last one, we now went to the Mwanakatwe Commission, which also made a few amendments to the Constitution. And then that is how the Bill of Rights was left intact. All right. So we quickly go to the elements, okay, of the Bill of Rights. And the elements of the Bill of Rights. Now, the current Bill of Rights forms Part 3 of the Constitution, which covers 11 to 32 articles. And then its preamble in Article 11 is a general declaration of the rights every person in Zambia is entitled to, regardless of their race, their place of origin, their political opinion, their color, their creed, their belief, their religion, their sex, or their marital status. Okay? Now, the state now states that these rights, okay, and freedoms are subject to limitations based on the affordability or availability state resources determined by cabinet, and as long as there is enjoyment, okay, as long as the enjoyment does not prejudice the rights and freedoms of other citizens. Okay, now we have a lot of fundamental rights and freedoms that are covered in the Bill of Rights that we're going to discuss. So when I talked about the preamble, just know it is an introduction or a preliminary statement to a legal document. All right. Then let's now begin to discuss these articles one after the other as they are in the Zambian Constitution. So to begin with, we have Article 12, which stipulates or talks about the protection of right to life. Now, the right is described as the supreme human right, okay? When we say supreme, meaning it's the highest, okay? It's the most important right, okay? because it forms the basis of other rights. You cannot have every other right that is remaining when you do not have the right to life. Okay, so it protects the life of an unborn child, implying that the termination of pregnancy is prohibited except in cases where you have been permitted by the law to say, okay, you can terminate the pregnancy. Okay, then it also places obligation on both the state and the individual to ensure that rights of individuals are done what? Protected. Then we go to Article 13. Now, this one talks about the protection of the right to personal liberty. Now, we need to know that to a large extent, the right deals with the procedure for arrest and detention, which curtails the freedom of movement of an individual, all right? Now, the liberty of a person here refers to the bodily movement, okay, in the narrowest sense. So, persons should not be arbitrarily unlawful deprived of liberty. They should be able to move their bodies as long as they are not under as long as they haven't done anything wrong that is against the Constitution. Okay, they should be allowed to move and go wherever. Then we have Article 14, which talks about the right to protection in forced labor. Okay, now this one talks about the slavery and forced labor prevents the liberty and freedom of the individual as a person. Okay, so as a person, if the right to liberty is not granted, right, you have little say over yourself. Okay, so now the state is under obligation, all right, by the International Convention on the Cultural Political Rights, okay, to prohibit by law any forms of slavery, like practices such as human trafficking, serfdom, exploitation of children, and several forms of marriage, except when hard labor is executed as punishment for a crime by the courts of law, as well as during normal civic obligations like compulsory military training or national service. Okay, then we have Article 15, which talks about the protection from torture, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment. Now, under this article, it talks about the right to freedom from torture, inhuman or degrading treatment, okay, which is absolute. Now, in 1984, the United Nations General Assembly adopted the Convention Against Torture. Okay, under this convention, state parties have an obligation to extradite or prosecute torturers. What do we mean by extradite? We mean to hand over a foreign criminal to their own state for what? For prosecution. Okay, then to prosecute, we mean to start legal proceedings against a suspect. Then we have Article 16, which talks about the protection from deprivation of property. Now, this article makes a provision for protection from deprivation of property, except in cases permitted by law under circumstances such as failure to pay tax, rate or due, and any other penalty for breach of any law, either under civil process or after conviction of an offense. All right. Then we have Article 17, which talks about the protection for privacy of home and other property. Now, this one, the article makes a provision for protection of privacy of home and other property. It prohibits the search of a person or his or her property or entry of premises without consent, except as established by the law. Then we have Article 18, which stipulates a provision to secure protection of the law. Now, this article gives provisions to secure protection of the law for any person that is charged with a criminal offense. Then it also deals with the administration of justice relating to pre-trial test and detention. Now, this one ensures independent and impartial court, as well as presumption of innocence until proven guilty, and the language interpretation, as well as legal representation. Then we have Article 19, which talks about the protection of freedom of conscience. Now, this one is an article that guarantees freedom of thought and freedom of religion, which may also imply freedom to change religion or belief, okay? Either alone or maybe you're in a group of people, and both in public or private, in the form of worship, you want to teach, you want to observe, okay? This one protects all those. Then we have Article 20, okay, which talks about the protection of freedom of expression. Now, we need to note that individuals or groups have guaranteed freedoms to hold opinions without interference, receive ideas and information without interference, impart and communicate ideas and information without interference, as well as exchange information through correspondence without what? Interference. Then we have Article 21, which talks about the protection of freedom of assembly and association. Now, under this article, every citizen has the right to assemble freely and associate with others, as well as form or belong to any political party, trade union, or other association for the protection of their own interests. Okay. Then we also have Article 22, which talks about the protection of freedom of movement. Now, this one guarantees the freedom to freely move throughout Zambia, then reside in any part of Zambia, then leave Zambia, and to return to Zambia anytime, all right? Now, the right to freedom of movement may be limited under a state of emergency, okay, and to a person that is serving a sentence of imprisonment. If it's not that, then somebody has the right to movement. Then we have Article 23, okay, which talks about the protection from discrimination. Now, this one is an article that provides for protection from discrimination on grounds of race, ethnic, sex, place of origin, marital status, political opinion, color, creed, or belief. Now, under this article, no one is allowed to discriminate another person or group of people, whether privately or when carrying out public duties. Then we also have Article 24, which stipulates the protection of young persons from exploitation. Now, this article prohibits engagement of young persons in any occupation or employment which would prejudice one's health or education or interfere with physical, mental, or moral development. It also ensures the protection from physical ill treatment of all forms of neglect, cruelty, and exploitation. Then it prohibits trafficking of young persons. Then aside from that, we have Article 25, which is the derogation from fundamental rights in detention. So to derogate is to reduce or lessen the strength or authority of a right. Okay? Now, what do we have in this article? This article now provides for derogation from fundamental rights in detention in times of public emergency. All right? Now, not all articles, okay, are derogable, okay? Derogative provisions are covered in articles such as Article 13, 16, 17, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, and 24. Now, when we go to the articles 12, 14, 15, and 18, these ones are non-derogable, okay? So, the constitutional provisions for the protection of fundamental rights and freedoms clearly state that such rights and freedoms are subject to limitations that are designed to ensure that the rights and freedoms of others are secured, and that public order and peace is always maintained. All right. Then we have Article 26, which talks about the provision that relates to restriction and detention. Now, the article largely deals with the provision that relates to rights of restricted and detained persons. Now, one has a right to be informed in writing in a language that he or she understands within 14 days of what? Of detention. The information should be published within this period that will indicate the place of detention and provision under the law that indicates that the detention is authorized. Okay, then after 3 months, a detainee may have the case reviewed by an independent and impartial tribunal, okay, that is established by law. Now, during this time, one has the right to consult legal representation and be present during proceeding or send a representative. Then aside from that, we have Article 27, which stipulates a tribunal to report on legislation. All right. Now, under this article, members of the parliament, okay, or rather members of parliament can arrest or maybe stop a bill which infringes on the Bill of Rights. Okay, now the article further makes a provision for the appointment of a special tribunal of 2 judges by the Chief Justice. The role of the tribunal is to report on any bill or statutory instrument which may not be consistent with the Constitution. Now, such a tribunal can only be established if not less than 30 members of the National Assembly make a report on a bill or statutory instrument. Now, in case of a bill, the request must be delivered to the Speaker within 3 days before the presentation of the bill in Parliament. Now, for a request concerning a statutory instrument, it must be delivered to the relevant authority within 14 days of the publication of the instrument in the Gazette. Now, what do we mean Gazette? Now, the Gazette means the government periodical that contains legal notices, bulletins of official appointments, as well as promotions. All right. Then we have Article 28. Now, this one enforces the protective provisions. All right. The article makes a provision for the enforcement, okay, of the rights that are provided in the Bill of Rights. What do we mean enforcement? To enforce is to give form to a law or to make a law effective. All right. Then this article provides a remedy to the domestic court, which is the High Court, in case of violation of the provisions of Article 11 to 26. If a person is aggrieved by any detention of the High Court, now the article makes a provision for appeal to the Supreme Court that provides now his case provides for that his case is not frivolous or vexatious. Okay. Now, what do we mean by not frivolous? We refer to a very serious case or maybe situation. And what do we mean by vexatious? We talk about a case that provokes trouble, anger, or distress. Then we have the last articles, which are Article 29 and 31. Now, these ones, they deal with special powers of the Republican president, such as detention of war, as well as the declaration of the state or public emergency. So now this is where the discussion of the Bill of Rights ends. So we have discussed the articles that are contained in the Bill of Rights. Okay, so we end here, and the next video continues to discuss more on this topic. Please go through this video as many times as possible, okay, to help you understand better.